is that we are here to serve, to service, to entertain, to provide, but somehow we are not. You know, I hate to say this. I still think in the minds of a lot of people subconsciously there is an inequality in their subconsciousness that they have viewed through media, politics, and like I say, just eons of the relationship based on a kind of almost like a master and servant. I hate to say that, but I think that is the case in some ways. So people will quite happily put the shirt on, or they'll listen to the music. They can go on holiday to the Caribbean or Africa or wherever. But do they really want to form deep and meaningful relationships with the other? Do they want to kind of take on board the struggles that those people face and the inequalities that they face in the way that they would take on struggles and inequalities within their own communities? And I've got to say that a lot of the time they don't. So it's a transaction, yes. There's a hell of a lot of popularity of global black culture, if you like, but it's something that's bought by people. There's a commodification, of culture there, and that's quite sad because you would think that through music, through football, through all the obvious things, as you say, the children of the Windrush generation in this country certainly, often prevailing, that would have over time given rise to some more deep and meaningful relationships between people across cultures, but sadly that's not always the case.
Well, that's quite a challenging answer. I wish we had time to delve into it more. Just a final point, David. I don't share this view myself as a supporter of Brexit, but there will be people who believe that Britain leaving the European Union is going to make pre-existing problems worse, even though actually there's quite a lot of racism in Europe.
Yeah, that's wow. That's something to mull over. I mean, I put in my lay my cards on the table. I voted to remain. However, as you just indicated, I sort of look over my shoulder at what's happening in in continental Europe and think, oh well,
Well, I've got to tell you, David, I've said all my life. I've said all my life, if you think England's racist, you've never lived in France.
Right. Shit. Yeah. I mean, and I've got to say, for all of the problems that we face in this country, and for all that, all of the problems that we've seen with the Windrush generation, I think that, we at least have in this country the ability to sort of communicate with each other on a level that moves us forwards incrementally, whereas look at other countries and the world over, and you can see they're going backwards in terms of the sort of stuff that we're talking about.
Where can we get the book, David?
Right, so the book Voices of the Windrush Generation is available from all the usual suspects: Waterstones, Amazon.
Who's the publisher?
And the publisher is 535, which is an imprint of Bonhead.
Excellent. David Matthews, Voices of the Windrush Generation. Definitely worth picking up. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let me do just a couple of tweets on the subject. Jason Lexit, CPB Morning Star, says Windrush scandal exposes the hypocrisy behind the EU's so-called freedom of movement. Alongside free movement for EU citizens, a growing wall of legislation was built to keep out Commonwealth citizens. Who cared? Not those leading tomorrow's FBPE picnic. I must say, Jason, I agree with that entirely. Hedy says, George, when Pele predicted that an African team would win the Football World Cup before 2000, people said he'd got it wrong. Au contraire, I seem to recall Pogba holding that trophy aloft with the superlative sons of Africa who've given grace and elegance to our game. Portugal played their reserve team against Scotland the other night, and almost every player was black, and very good they were too. Patrick O'Shaughnessy says many street names in Glasgow's Merchant City celebrate the slave trade. I dare say it's the same in every major British port. The families of the old money, most of whom very wealthy to this day, haven't been held to account. Why shouldn't they be? I think that's a very good question. By the way, the Beatles' song Penny Lane is about an actual street in Liverpool called Penny Lane. Who was Penny? He was a slave trader. Now, I had the privilege for my television show, which goes out tomorrow, of interviewing my next guest just yesterday. He is Professor Satanu Das. He's an academic and an author of distinction. I didn't know quite how much distinction until I interviewed him. He has written a book called Challenging the Colour of First World War Memory. Now, I had the privilege for my television show, which goes out tomorrow, of interviewing my next guest, just yesterday. He is Professor Satanu Das. He's an academic and an author of distinction. And in the Second World War. I didn't know what British Commonwealth citizens, in their millions, the number he gave that I gave you, 4 million black and Asian soldiers in the British Armed Forces in the First World War. Have you ever seen them represented? Have you ever seen them in a movie? You ever seen them in the pictures, compendiums during this last 4 years that we've been commemorating the centenary of the First World War? Very, very rarely. And I'm lucky, Professor Satanu Das has agreed to join us this evening. Professor, thanks very much for coming on the show.
Pleasure.
Just summarize, if you would, the intention of the book and the content of the book.
I think my intention was to show how wide, actually massive, the contribution of non-white soldiers were to the First World War, with a focus on South Asians, Indians, Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, and thus, as you said so rightly, to challenge the color of memory. It's not just white.
It is an extraordinary thing that that contribution was made and yet not actually even remembered. Why is that?
Well, it is quite extraordinary because we hear about the Australian or the Canadian contribution.
Yes, we do all the time. In Gallipoli, for example, we hear about it, not least because it was a savage blunder which cost the lives of many Australian and New Zealand servicemen needlessly, pointlessly. But Gallipoli also had a huge number of British Indian troops there.
Absolutely, that's what I was going to say. And it is completely airbrushed, not just out of European memory, but in Australian memory. They never mentioned that in Gallipoli there were an enormous amount of Indians, and that more British troops were killed in Gallipoli than Australians or New Zealanders.
No, yeah, but why? Is it racism or what is it?
Two things. The first thing is that the Indian soldiers, they were largely non-literate. They did not know how to read or write, and thus did not leave behind the letters, poetry, short stories, diaries, which formed the cornerstone of First World War memory. And the second, I think, in Europe, they were known during the war, but once the war was completed, the whole nationalist movement of India took force. And that's what India is remembered for. So the soldiers were fighting for the wrong side for India. And out of institutional racist visions, they were airbrushed out of European memory.
Now, it was by no means a foregone conclusion that a very substantial, huge section of British India, if I can use that horrid term, would fight for the British because the Turks, the Ottomans, were the caliphate to which all Muslims in the world notionally owed allegiance. Yet here the British were asking Muslim soldiers from the subcontinent to fight against the Ottoman, whose caliph had called the German war effort a jihad, a holy war.
It is very interesting that all these Muslim soldiers were fighting against the Ottomans, their co-religionists, but partly because they were subjects of the Muslim princes, and the Muslim princes were completely, in that sense, in the pocket of the British administrative Raj. Because the moment the war was declared, all these native princes immediately showed their allegiance, and then they commanded their Muslim subjects to fight for the British. And most of the soldiers were very poor, and they would get 11 rupees, which would be like 1 penny. But that was a huge amount of money for them. So I guess in some ways livelihood before religion.
Now, it won't surprise that many people that there were substantial numbers of troops from the black and Asian populations of the British Empire fighting on the Eastern Front. But it must have been very exotic for both the soldiers and the civilians when substantial numbers of these forces began to arrive in Europe on the Western Front.
Yes, there was this sense of amazement on both sides. Like when the Indians first got off the ship at Marseille, people tried kind of calling out Hindus, and the women would come and try to kiss them, some of them, and touch them. And some of the women also wanted to shave off the beards of Sikhs, thinking they had been in the ship for too long. So, but on the other hand, for these Indians and many of the West Indian and Senegalese troops, it was also quite magical. They would call this land fairyland, but then they would often form this very close relationship with this elderly French women whose sons had gone out to battle, and would call them French mothers. And even after going back to India or West Indies after the war, they kept up this correspondence with their French mothers. And it's interesting, it's with the French they had this relationship, not with the British troops.
Was there a predisposition amongst the French to be more accepting?
I think the French were, because with the British Indian Army, the Indians were separate, whereas the French insisted on a kind of mixed regiment, and for the French, the Indians were really exotic. So I don't think the French were colorblind, but they were a bit dazzled by the Indians, whereas they were slightly more racist towards their own Senegalese troops.
Senegal being a French colony at that time.
Absolutely, and there is also a class dimension, because the French would often be quite open to black American troops, but be a bit racist towards their own Senegalese subjects. So, it's not just color, but lots of other things inflecting that color consciousness.
Now, you have produced this book. It's a very fine book. Tell us the proper title, because I gave the wrong one.
Sorry, it's a bit of a mouthful. It's called India, Empire and First World War Culture, Writings, Images and Songs. And songs, I think, are absolutely central, because these men were non-literate. They did not know how to read or write, but they were immensely literary. They came from this robust oral cultures of the villages. So there would be a lot of singing and recitation and conversation that I've tried to recover.
Now, these soldiers all went back, of course, most of them anyway, to their own countries. In the case of the Indian soldiers, as you said, before not very long, they were in the obvious position of asking, well, we've been to Europe, we've met the British, they're not gods. Why should we allow 60,000 of them to run our country of hundreds of millions?
Absolutely, because I think one of the biggest factors, or one of the biggest things that they realized was that white people, they were not invincible. And they were just absolutely appalled. They watched in horror white men kill each other. So if Europe could not contain its own violence, how can it claim the so-called moral right to civilize the rest of the world?
In that sense, did the war accelerate the struggle for Indian freedom?
I think it did. I don't think there's a straight line between war experience and then, immediately followed by the Amritsar massacre and then the nationalist movement. And there is definitely because people started challenging this sense of, assumed superiority of the white races because they'd seen them behave like barbarians, as Sigmund Freud said, on the battlefield.
Just finally, for the listeners who are not familiar with the Amritsar massacre.
One of the most atrocious kind of acts of colonial brutality in the whole history of British India.
And this 1 year after...
This saying that apparently about Kipling, and I think in the Guardian, I'm much more hopeful the Guardian, Ian Jack is reviewing it for the Guardian. And it is getting quite a bit of attention, so I'm quite happy because, I think this whole non-white contribution absolutely should be known in the final year of the 4 years of commemoration.
Well, to say the very least, thank you, Professor Santanu Das, whose book on recovering the memory of colour in the story of the First World War is a very, very important one. Time for a couple of written pieces. George, we should have got Donald J. Trump to negotiate Brexit for us. We would have been out the very next day, and he would have still hit the EU with numerous tariffs for their insolence and fired a few Tomahawk missiles into Brussels for good measure, probably with the words "from a duly elected president" written on the side of them, knowing how the Donald operates, thus teaching the unelected bureaucrats, technocrats, a valuable lesson. Then we could get him to sort out the scallops fishing problem, while telling him he doesn't need to be quite so diplomatic when it comes to dealing with the French. Loving the show, George. All the best. Mark in Lowestoft. And David Leviscont, one of my most clever correspondents, says, gee, a lot of people say that corporations don't care. But however, they do care immensely. Unfortunate for us, though, they just care for money, not people. Money has become more important than people. Welcome to the pit of misery. Dilly dilly, he points out. John says, to solve the Brexit Irish border, will the DUP Tory party offer the North of Ireland people a binding vote on joining with the rest of Ireland? So why is the Irish government still not in session at this difficult time? And John goes on, cuts to public services include community integration, social housing, police cuts, which results in, per 530 people, 1 member of the police. What can go wrong? Well, the second hour has flown by, but the good news is there's a third hour still to come. This is the mother of all talk shows, and it's a two-way street. If you disagree with me or anything you've heard from others on here, don't be shy to be in touch. We're talking about Brexit, what's going to happen. I started the show by telling you that my sources at Westminster have a strong indication that the Prime Minister's days are numbered in days, but that there will not be an election in the Conservative Party for her successor, that there will be an agreement amongst all the putative Prime Ministers, all the putative leaders of the Conservative Party, that the former Brexit Secretary, David Davis, will be, as it were, an interim Prime Minister to finish the Brexit job, and then at some later stage will make way, I say, with a knowledge of previous times when people have been interim but didn't necessarily agree with that title themselves. What do you think of how the Brexit imbroglio is rolling out? What do you think about Windrush? What do you think about the various issues we've been discussing tonight. 0344 499 1000. Let's hear first from Julian in Henley. Julian, welcome.
Hello, George. I'm not in Henley anymore. I was
Okay.
last week. I move around.
Oh, that's all right. That's all right. Okay, mate.
A good friend of mine who's sadly passed away now was a Jordanian man who served in the British Army. And
Many Jordanians did. In fact, the author, Julian, was telling me yesterday when I spoke with him that there was a hierarchy of martial races. So, for example, Sikhs were regarded as real potential frontline soldiers of the highest rank. Jordanians would have been equally, I think, whereas Hindus, for example, were in the British Army, but they weren't actually allowed to fight because of this hierarchical, racialized approach to the military at that time. So yes, Jordanian, yes, go on.
well, yes, and this dear friend, I knew him as Abu Omar because he was the father of my best friend in school, Omar, and he served on the Allenby Bridge, and probably in later years regretted it when he realised that Jordan was a buffer state for Israel, and he served in the British Army later in Sandhurst, and he showed me some of his pictures.
You know, almost every military officer in the Arab world was trained at Sandhurst.
Yeah. Well, he showed what stuck with me and what resounded when you mentioned the hierarchy and the colorism. He showed me his military pictures when they were all stood together, and he was on the back row, and there were several other officers, black officers, probably from different parts of Africa. And I said, why are they putting all the black and brown guys at the back of the picture? And he said, well, they put us at the back in the picture, but if there's a war, they would send us to the front.
Very good line.
Very good. Remember that. Thank you, George.
Thank you, Julian. Nice to hear from you again. Let's go to the legend. That is Norma in Bristol. Norma,
I
good
always
evening.
laugh, George, don't I? I've got two contrary points, actually, to make to you. It's about black history.
Yeah.
And one's good and one's bad. Just bear with me, my reason's a bit funny. Jeremy Corbyn came to Bristol last week because we've got the Black History Month, and he visited our local, it's called Ujima, it's a local radio station which celebrates black culture, and my son has a regular slot on it with a very lovely...
So you're not the only radio star in the family.
No, he's quite good.
How excellent is that? Well, I know where he got it from.
But the thing is, it was lovely and they had photographs in the paper, etc. But this is the bad. Tonight, in the local newspaper, we've been changing the name of the Colston Hall, which is our big music venue, is being changed because there's lots of work being done and they want to name change it. Now, I'm only quoting very quickly, not very much, but it's a short letter, and it says, when are we going to lay to rest this nonsense about changing the name of the Colston Hall? Edward Colston was a great benefactor to our city, and these events happened well over 400 years ago. If you feel ashamed at what went on then, keep it to yourself. Don't plaster it all over the papers. My great-great-great-grandson, father, Sir John Hawkins, was supposedly one of the leaders of the slave trade. Do I feel ashamed? Of course I don't. I say to all you people, get a life. There are far worse things going on in our city.
Well, you're more likely to take that view if you're the great-great-great-grandchild of a slave trader than you are if you're the great-great-great-grandchild of a slave, aren't you?
Well, yeah, but it's a horrible letter.
Yes. And by the way, I haven't seen it yet, but there will be people already getting in touch, he said euphemistically, to argue that they were not responsible for slavery, so why should they be involved in any special pleading? And that's a common view amongst many people in Britain. So the sense of shame is not shared by everyone. It's felt by me. I think I told you on a previous visit that I made to the Museum of Slavery in Liverpool. I was sitting down, gobsmacked, dumbstruck, reading a tablet on the wall about the plight of the slaves that had been brought through Liverpool. And sitting on the bench with me was a young black girl from where, I don't know. But she looked at me and I looked at her, and I actually didn't know what to say. She was not a slave and I was not a slaver. But if you ask me if I felt a sense of shame being white, sitting on a bench with her being black, I did. I really did, Norm.
No, and just quickly, we've got a big statue of Edward Colston in the middle of the centre, and some people want it removed. I would quite like it to be removed to the museum to say this is Edward Colston and give the history in our local museum, the Hemshed. But people do not want that taken away. Why should we revere this man? He did give a lot of money to Bristol, but don't revere him and keep him there. Do you know what I mean?
I do indeed know what you mean, Norma. I'm with you. 0344 499 1000. If you're not with Norma and not with me on that subject, I want to hear from you. In fact, we'll prioritise your call. 0344 499 1000. Jem has tweeted, once the UK leaves the EU and thrives, there will be a stampede of countries wanting out of the EU. The EU will fight ruthlessly and very dirty to stop that happening. And RIP Hero Isam says, returned from work and hurriedly switched on the mother of all talk shows, heard an egghead with the typical liberal argument saying that drugs should be decriminalised. I say never even decriminalise even cannabis if you love your kids. Multi-dimensional harms. That's from RIP Hero Isam Zahreddin. And Asif says, the mother of all talk shows is providing fascinating discourse on historical and contemporary racial issues. I like to think that in the UK, celebration of black cultural and sporting heroes is not a transactional, subconscious master-slave role play like the author suggested. Optimistically, I like to think British society at large is all about embracing vibrant multiculturalism and commonality of human spirit. In America, the NFL's treatment of Colin Kaepernick and the establishment's vilification of this black sporting hero shows what real racial contempt looks like. Thank you, Asif. I did say that the answer was challenging. It was challenging to me, and I shall think carefully about what David said. This is from Mary. There isn't much to help kids on drugs either. My little cousin got a visit to help him. Finally, after his mum had asked for help for years, she brought them into the house and over to his coffin. They were too late. He was one of 3 who died in 1 week. X-Ray Vision says, I hold the mainstream media responsible for giving Theresa May an easy ride at every turn, never holding her to account. And Lizzie says the Tony Blair, he could be the director of a building company working in Iraq on a huge government contract. David Cameron could be a pig farmer. Tim Farron could play a minor role at the Equalities Commission. And Nigel Farage could be a trout farm owner. And Liam says, one of your previous texters was talking nonsense. EU freedom of movement isn't racist, it's reciprocal. A Jamaican will find it hard to live in the UK, just like a Brit would find it harder to live in Jamaica than in an EEA state. Why, Liam? Why so? When the people in Jamaica speak the same language as us. Now, I have traversed an era When I was first elected to Parliament more than 30 years ago, the internet hadn't been invented. There were no emails, therefore. The fax hadn't been invented. There were no faxes, and faxes have come and they have gone. Some of you don't even know what I'm talking about. Never seen a fax machine. But I used to come into Parliament every morning and be given a gigantic bundle of mail, envelopes, that I would sit down, because in those days we didn't have an office. We'd sit down in the library with a letter opener and open each envelope and take out, of course, overwhelmingly handwritten letters. And I thought I'd left all that behind, and now I just deal with literally hundreds of tweets and emails. But when I came into the studio this evening, there was, for me, a brown envelope. Not that kind of a brown envelope. It was addressed, and it was said in brackets, only to be opened by Mr. George Gallagher at the Talk Radio Towers. And inside was a very nicely handwritten letter from Skipton Mallet in Somerset, from which I don't receive a lot of post, from a Mr. Winston Leslie Coolidge. Dear Sir, it is with effort and enthusiasm that I write to you, and I am doing so as I know that you are a man of conviction and clear integrity. The idea